it's seeming more and more relevant to say that Bitcoin is putting in a bottom here, and literally no one cares. No one actually cares. Why is that? Because this market has been absolutely damn boring for the past who knows how long now. So I've lost count at this point. Goes up $1,000, goes down $1,000, doesn't matter. Nothing really spectacular happening within this market, but ultimately things are moving. And of course, for the people who are in the market as of right now, very reminiscent in my experience to kind of that period in, I guess it was like middle of 2020 when Bitcoin was trading between about 9,000, somewhere around 9,000 for like 3 months. Just kind of doing this very constructive behavior, very, very constructive behavior, but albeit extremely boring. So other than that, I want to welcome you back to the Krown Crypto channel. I think it's time for us to jump right into this one. I first want to follow up on a setup that we were looking at earlier this week, right on over here, as we were looking at the HPDR indicators firing off that nice little probabilistic setup where we do see closures below that blue 50% of historic returns range lows, coupled with a declining volatility on the BBWP moving average right here, which happened simultaneously at about 27,300-ish region, which did give a probabilistic setup for a nice move to the upside. On average, we were looking for about 4%. In this case, I don't think we got 4%. I think we got a little bit less than that, about 2.5%, 3%. That's the state of the market right now, but ultimately did play out, and we can see that the statistics, over time, working just boring, man, just boring. That's just is what it is. Anyways, now that we've gotten through that, we can get into the new stuff, the fun stuff. Of course, some very interesting things have happened on CME in the last 24 hours because we did see the weekly close for CME. And first and maybe not foremost, well, should we go over first and foremost? How about first and foremost? Okay, first and foremost is that we did see the weekly on CME close above that white moving average, which is a 200 simple moving average. Just long-term, Bitcoin being above it is generally good. On CME, we don't have a whole hell of a lot of history with it, unfortunately, because it hasn't been around as long as, say, the spot index, but that is very likely going to greatly influence where the spot index does close. And as you can see, as of right now, the 200 simple on the spot index is about just above $28,000. So if CME is anything to go off of, did close 28,145. Assuming that Bitcoin, gets a little bit of a bid before the weekend closure on Sunday, we probably do see that one follow through this either on Sunday or maybe coming into next week as well. But so far so good. CME typically does, set the tone, and in this case, that would be significant. So, just going over it through the full annals of history for Bitcoin, it's not going to be a perfect thing, but generally being above it with a positive slope is good for the BULAs, and generally being below it is, well, not good. Obviously, we've actually never seen it have a negative slope, but in this case, it's actually still living below a little bit, just by hair, over here on the index. Again, currently trading about $100 below that number. So if Bitcoin can just pop back up above, just slightly above $28,000, that would be a pretty good indication, or perhaps the next indication as soon as Sunday, tomorrow, that we are going to see this one continue upwards and onwards. Also of interest right here, we did see that Bitcoin has closed above the 20 simple moving average on the weekly as well for CME. And now we're even seeing the 20 simple moving average, that yellow moving average right here, have a slightly positive slope. So one, it is closing above, and two, it does have a slightly positive slope, but slightly is good enough in this case. And again, just looking throughout the full history of CME, Bitcoin being below it, generally good. Bitcoin being above it, Bitcoin being below it, generally good for bears. Bitcoin being above it, generally bad for bears. How about let's switch around that, do the old reversal for the roles there. People always come at it from a bullish perspective, right? But in this case, like a couple things are very important here. Is just one, that slope. I mean, you can see that even when the slope changes, like right in over here, that's when things really get dire, pretty much in all major corrections. And when it's to the upside, well, typically very, very nice for the boo laws. Of course, this is CME, and spot price action is going to have a chance to do the same thing at the end of this weekend. Needs to close above basically 28,000 bucks. So if you close above 28,000 bucks, you got not just the 20 simple, but also the 200 simple as well. One thing before the next. Again, putting in this nice constructive behavior around these major moving averages is generally good for the long term. And of course, when we go to the index, you can see a much more long-term history for this. And again, it's not going to be perfect, but when you're looking at the slope and the position of price action either above or below that moving average, it's a pretty damn good indication for more long-term trends, let's say. So I would be looking at this as the next sort of development here, favoring the boo laws. And again, 28,000 bucks going to be that major number to be aware of coming into this Sunday closure, which again, CME already did close above. So spot probably does something similar or the same, or at least the same, maybe the same thing as well. Maybe even next week, something like that. Anyways, going over here to my next chart, I just also want to say that just in general for CME, all major moving averages are switching into a bullish posturing. We do see that the lower periods are moving above the higher periods, except for that white 200 simple. That's going to be the next sort of boss, if you will. But we see that cyan moving average, that's a 9, the yellow, which is a 21, and the green 55. All layered in with higher periods above lower periods. So intuitively, you probably know that already means, the trend is kind of strengthening within that direction. Not that there's so much of a trend here, but, you get my point. It's starting to switch into a bullish posturing. When was the last time that we actually saw something flip in that same sort of vicinity? That would be way over here, actually. In fact, kind of around the same area that I was referencing in 2020, starting in about May. So you see all these major moving averages kind of conglomerate right here. At that point, the 200 simple did not have enough data to actually populate. There was not 200 weeks of Bitcoin price action for CME. But still, you see them all kind of conglomerating around the same area. Not like this over here where they're very spread out, but in this area over here where they're being pulled in a lot more and setting in higher lows on the weekly, more importantly. And that led into, that phenomenal run that we did see in 2021. And then the opposite but equal over here to the downside. All of them moved into a bearish posturing. That's when Bitcoin really started to break through, that multi-year area that a lot of people are being aware of at about, low 30s, and led us into the depths of hell that we've seen in more recent times. So, is this significant over here? I would argue yes. Now that I recognize it, even on my drawing tools, something that I really don't give two fucks about, but we'll talk about anyways because it's a boring day. We do see the inverted herp and derp also playing out here too, with that neckline still being lived above at low 27. So, what's my main position on this one? It's the same thing they've been saying for about a week now, maybe a little bit more than that since Bitcoin started getting this region. As long as Bitcoin's above 27,000 bucks, favoring the boo laws. Below 27,000 bucks, it's not necessarily bearish. I'd just be looking for a correction back down, maybe another 1,000 to 1,500 bucks, and then 25.5 region is kind of the big area. Below there, yeah, you start to get pretty damn bearish, or just anywhere below September lows, extremely fucking bearish. But for right now, Bitcoin boo laws doing what you would want them to do if you want them to be the ultimate benefactors of current price action. Anyways, what else do we have? The weekly jewel is actually starting to turn up as well while this is all going on. We do see that the weekly jewel over here, well, it hasn't necessarily gotten that positive signature just yet. We want to see that cyan blue color, one thing before the other, and now it has a positive slope supported by DMI. It looks like it's probably going to fire off next week. But of course, we need to see that one. Weekly RSI back above the neutral, or back, above the 50 zone right here, and also back above that, that exponential moving average right here as well. And what's also interesting about this is that we saw weekly lower RSI reads on this August/September correction than what we did see in March. March was this major move down right here, right? Where Bitcoin, or not Bitcoin, but some banks started to fail, whatever the fuck, doesn't matter. And then Bitcoin, put in a major low and moved its way significantly to the upside. So putting that in context, the RSI over here getting lower than that is a divergence, to be fair. It's not going to be a traditional one because technically speaking, this was a low over here as well. Apologies. If we go to the 5-day, I think it's a little more obvious, and the 5-day does plot that hidden bullish evidence of multiple drives from that point as well. So, fair enough. The 5-day is probably more accurate for CME as of right now. Anyways, moving on here, what else should we get on to? Weekly stochastic momentum continues again to the upside on CME. It is, it did close above 26,000 bucks, so we'll once again do that on spot price action again, closing tomorrow night. Very likely does remain to the upside as long as Bitcoin's above 25,650. Also gonna be reclaiming that moving average on it and has the double green dots of destiny over here, which essentially suggests that DMI supports this move. And in that case, we haven't really seen like a cross from the critical zone with a double dot actually ever, but even with a single dot from around the critical zone, the last time that we saw that was January, where Bitcoin got ready for this move over here, from 17,000 to 25,000, and then continued onwards and upwards. Trying to find another example that's comparable, but there's really not. Where again it's crossing from the critical zone. So I will move on to the next chart over here, and what we can now see is the 5-day BBWP versus volatility signature. Again, it's still very much baking here. It has that same sort of double dot of destiny on the 5-day, and the 5-day stochastic oscillator is going to again remain to the upside as long as Bitcoin's above 25,650, which is closing tonight. We do not see volatility expansion just yet, so this is the really interesting part about this, is that despite the most action that we've seen in about a month or a month and a half, things are still, it's still not really firing off a setup here just yet. But when it does, from that point, we're probably looking at somewhere at least a 30% move, maybe a 40 to 50% move, definitely possible. If things do get really crazy, and that's also reasonable, I'd say as well, just because we've seen things contracted for so long. Which does imply that the resolution from that will be likely greater. Anyways, so looking at it right there, again, I really don't have too much new things to say other than as long as Bitcoin's above 25, or especially 25.5, I'm favoring the Bulaws. Pullbacks are just that, pullbacks. 27,000 bucks is kind of the more interim relevant region below 27. Yeah, expect a correction back down to the September base, but I wouldn't necessarily call that bearish. The only thing that would really make me bearish here is below the September lows, or closures below about 25.5 on like a weekly, let's say. So I think that's a good place for me to be leaving off on this particular video. Do we want to go over Dixie as well? Do we want to go over the short-term ranges? I mean, probably ebbs and flows here. Maybe might come down in the short term. I don't have strong opinions about that. None of this video has been on the short term, but we did see the Dixie reversal. The weekly and the 5-day going to be turning down as far as momentum goes, and also just a massive what do you want to call this, shooting star dildo rejection. At a long-term reach in the same area of rejection that we did see in November of 2022. So I think this is a good place for me to be leaving off. And we saw the reversal on stocks. This was a little bit of an easier one to call. But yeah, fair enough. All right, good place for me to be leaving off. As always, I want to wish you the best of the best. Take care. I'm always looking at the wrong camera. It's right here. Hey, what's up? Hey, how you doing? As always, I want to wish you the best of the best. Take care. Much love. And how you doing?